Good afternoon, Maverick Insiders and everyone joining this webinar. I hope you are all good and heeding President Cyril Ramaphosa's call to stay at home and help slow the coronavirus infections. My name is Ray Mahlaka and I'm a journalist at Daily Maverick. Now, I don't know about you, but over the past few days, I have been feeling quite anxious about South Africa. The economy is struggling and the future is looking more uncertain. We are told by economists that over the next few months, things are going to be very tough for the economy and business, especially for small and medium enterprises. Some of you are small business owners or work for such businesses. How are you surviving this lockdown period? Is your business impacted? Do you have a recovery plan for when the lockdown is lifted and over? Do you think relief efforts offered by the government and the private sector go far enough in addressing your challenges and concerns? These are some of the questions we'll be exploring in this webinar, which has been made possible by Absa. So thank you so much, Absa. By Danki Siyabonga Relebocha. And joining us for this webinar is Bongiwe Gangeni. She's Absa's Deputy CEO for Retail and Business Bank. Bongiwe, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks for having me.
And we also have John Dludlu. He is from the Small Business Institute, which is an organization representing the interests of small businesses. John, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ray, and good afternoon, Bongiwe, and thank you for inviting us.
Thanks, guys. So you too can participate in this webinar by asking us questions or posting comments about your own experiences. The point of this webinar is to really make it as interactive as possible. And if you haven't joined our Maverick Insider community, I would implore you to do so by visiting Daily Maverick's website or contacting us on insiders@dailymaverick.co.za. Insiders@dailymaverick.co.za. One last thing before we actually jump into this webinar, we'd also like to hear from you about how we at Daily Maverick can help you during the coronavirus crisis. We have a duty to inform you and empower you with information, but we also like to hear from you how we can go beyond this. After all, we are in this, all of us, together. So maybe let's start with Bongiwe. Let me start with you, Bongiwe. I mean, it's been more than 2 weeks since President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a national state of disaster due to the COVID-19 outbreak. What has Absa's experience been like with small businesses so far? And are you starting to see a number of small businesses coming forward and already showing signs of distress?
Thanks, Ray. It's certainly been a challenging time for all South Africans, whether you are talking to consumers or speaking to business and even corporates in general. I think our small business customers or our business banking customers in general have started talking to us around some of the challenges that they're facing on the back of what is going to be a very challenging time for us all as South Africans. A number of the areas where we've started to see customers coming forward, talking to us about their challenges are largely customers, in sort of your retail space, customers in the restaurant industry, the tourism industry, and generally industries where customers are offering services that have not necessarily deemed to be essential services. And obviously the impact varies depending on the size of the business, the services offered by the business, and whether everything that they offer has not been deemed to be essential services, and also how long the business has been around. What you typically find is that obviously if it's a startup that just recently started 6 months ago, this might be even more difficult to deal with, from an immediate cash flow perspective. If it's a business that's been around for a lot longer, it may be a little easier to deal with for a couple of months. And I think businesses are being impacted differently.
And I'm sure some of them had already had underlying issues before even COVID-19 struck South Africa.
Absolutely on point. I mean, I think it's well known that this country has been undergoing, has been going through very difficult economic circumstances. The economy hasn't been growing now for a number of years. We've been talking about how do we get the economy going? How do we get the economy sort of out of the doldrums that it's been in. So I think it's no unknown fact that, you know, South Africa as an economy has been struggling. Our levels of unemployment have been high. So I think already we have been seeing some of our small business customers come under a lot of pressure. We've been seeing our small business book particularly coming under pressure. So this has just added to that. Obviously, the downgrade that was announced, by Moody's last Friday has also now further precipitated what was already a very challenging environment, for not only small businesses, but consumers. And you know that our small businesses are largely dependent on consumers. But what you've also seen are big corporates coming under pressure. Now, small businesses also typically are suppliers to these corporates. So when you get a big corporate like Sasol or Edcon coming under pressure, that also has a direct impact on small businesses.
Yeah. John, are you also seeing at SBI your members, largely small businesses, are they feeling the pressure?
Ray, thank you very much for the question. I think can I just give a perspective of what we're dealing with here? So a few years ago, we did a study as SBI to find out actually the landscape of SMEs in South Africa. This study found that of all the formerly, there are 267,959 businesses that are formally registered. So they're registered with the Revenue Service, they're registered with UIF, which means that they're employing people that are paying tax. And of those 267,959 businesses, 98.5% of them classify themselves as small businesses. So many people are they employing? They're employing 28% of the formally employed people.
John, let me just step in there.
8% translates to 3.9 million people. So that's exactly those people who are at risk today if we're talking about the SME landscape in South Africa.
John, I must say we're losing you for a moment there, and the numbers were a bit muffled as well. Do you want to maybe just repeat the headline numbers? We seem to have lost John Bongiwe.
No,
But I mean, for people who don't, really know about the importance of small businesses and the role in which they play in the labor market in South Africa, could you maybe help us understand, the importance of small businesses and why they matter?
Yeah. So businesses have increasingly started playing a very, very important role in our economy. Over the last couple of years, or in the recent past, corporates have really not been employing. If anything, major corporates have been retrenching employees. So businesses provide a fantastic avenue to create employment, to drive our economy. They're a significant contributor to the economy and are a very important cog in ensuring that this country moves forward. But also big corporates are born from those small businesses, right? A lot of the big corporates that we have started off as very small businesses that then over time grow to become the big corporates that they become. But ultimately, small business remain the biggest employer in our economy, and we have to find a way to safeguard those small businesses as they then also offer opportunities for other individuals to be employed.
John, I see you. We have you back. Can you hear us? Can you see us?
I can hear you and I can see you.
All right, fabulous. So we were just talking about the importance of small businesses and the role in which they play in the labor market. They play quite an important role. But I just wonder, John, what is the worst case scenario here post, the COVID-19 shutdown in terms of economic growth and the jobless figures as well? Because whatever worst case scenario there will be, this is the environment in which small businesses will have to operate in, will have to survive in as well. So can you just help us understand post COVID-19 where we will be potentially sitting?
Okay, so Ray, our study showed that there are 3.9 million South Africans who are employed in the formally employed in the SME space in South Africa. So what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is the following. The help that has been promised by banks by the private sector, by government, does not get to the SMEs. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is the economy takes time to rebound. The third part of it, of course, is what we're dealing with right now. Already we are in the recession. We have insecurity of power supply in South Africa, and we have cash flow problems resulting from late payments, which are meant. All of these persist. I tell you, Ray, the situation is too ghastly to contemplate. So already we have 29% unemployment rate in South Africa. We've got 55% of those of youth as unemployed in South Africa. Now imagine a situation where those SMEs do not survive. You have parents who are joined by their kids and into unemployment in South Africa, and that's a recipe for a social explosion in our country.
Yeah, it's quite scary, John, because, you know, if we stabilize the COVID-19 numbers in 3 months or so, then the numbers are stabilized, but the economic impact is much more long term. So we're talking about what, a 12 to possibly 24-month impact. But Bongiwe, maybe let's bring you in here. At the weekend, Absa announced relief measures to consumers and banking clients as well that are effective from 30 March. So, for small business clients, Absa said the relief program would entail solutions based on their unique requirements and operations. Just talk us through what you're doing there to help small businesses during this tough time.
Thanks, Ray. So we launched an extensive debt relief program, which covers both our retail side of the business and also our business banking side of the business. Now, from an Absa perspective, we've taken a view that our payment relief program will be available to all of our business banking customers. So it's not only targeted at SMEs. Any business can approach us based on the criteria that we put on the table. So the payment relief is for 3 months, in which over that 3 months, you don't have to pay both capital and interest. The interest does get capitalized, on the loan. And so what would then happen is that the duration of the loan would be extended at the end of the period. It's targeted from a proactive basis at our commercial asset, finance business, as well as those customers with mortgage-backed business loans. So in those instances, we will be approaching those customers directly, making the offer, and the customer can opt into the solution that we are offering. All of our other customers with other product sets can contact us directly to have a conversation around business-specific solutions, because sometimes it is very important to understand the context within which the specific business is looking for an intervention, and to understand what are some of the dynamics that are specific to that business. So as it relates to commercial asset finance and mortgage-backed business lending, we are proactively contacting customers. Any other product set where customers think that they would want to have support, they can proactively contact us, and we'll have solutions based on that individual customer.
Many of our viewers here will say, is it productive to roll over payments over a 3-month period? Because eventually those payments will catch up with you. There'll be, as you said, accrued interest. The loan term will be extended further. So, is it really ideal and productive to have that kind of structure in terms of the relief measures that you are offering?
So, Ray, I think the first thing that we've been very clear about is saying to customers, where you are in a position to pay, please continue to pay. So where you're not under severe cash flow stress, we're encouraging our customers to continue to pay. Obviously, Ray, this is about short-term cash flow relief. What we are seeing is customers who last month had X turnover, and within a month that turnover halves, or in some instances is down to about 20% of what that customer used to generate. This is about just really helping customers bridge over this period under very, very difficult circumstances. Obviously, the loan that you have with the bank doesn't go away. It cannot go away. The banks have to continue to be sustainable. But what we are doing is finding mechanisms of ensuring that there's additional cash flow into our customers' accounts over this period, so that they're able to do the things that they can't simply switch off overnight.
Yeah. John, let's bring you in here. So we had a survey with our Maverick insiders where we asked them, asked them a lot of questions about how they're surviving this period. Nearly 60% of our respondents said they want the government to suspend mortgages and rental payments. So we're talking about far more aggressive and much more targeted interventions here. Do you think the banks are doing enough? Have they gone further enough in terms of offering some of your members, the kind of relief measures that would really cushion the economic blow from the coronavirus outbreak and the shutdown as well?
Okay, so Ray, I think the question applies both ways. Is the private sector doing enough? Is the government sector doing enough? I think there's more that both sectors can do. So let's start with the public sector. The public sector has reacted from the macroeconomic point of view. Government has set aside some money, and the Reserve Bank has cut rates and is starting to buy bonds. What more can be done? I think from our point, as SBI, we asked for a 2% rate cut from the Reserve Bank. We had 100 basis points. We appreciate that. But we're saying to the Reserve Bank, you don't have to wait for another monetary policy meeting. Can you please just use this period to act urgently? Give us another rate cut, please. As for the government as well, we are calling on the economic cluster to coordinate all the economic support measures that have been set aside by government to be announced. Let's announce two things. Let's announce the quantum of the support. Let's also announce the duration of the measures, so that the economic operators, especially the SME segment of the economy, can plan their lives better. We are told that this crisis may be with us for another 12 months. So let the economic measures that are put in place be put in place for the duration of the crisis, not only for the next 4 months, 3 months, whatever. So the banks have now been given a window of opportunity during this extraordinary time to coordinate their actions. Of course, they are not banking everyone in South Africa, but if they coordinated their actions and prolonged as well the relief that they're giving to their clients, I think there would be an impact.
It's very interesting. So we just posted a poll on this platform where we asked participants of this webinar, do you think the relief measures announced by banks and the government go far enough in addressing some of your operational challenges? An overwhelming 92% said no, and 7% said yes. So that is quite sobering. Now, Bongiwe, let's bring it in here. Maybe let's talk about the how-to parts. This is a difficult period in which, maintaining healthy cash flows will be very difficult for small and medium enterprises. Overhead costs will still be there that they still have to pay. So what sort of guidance are you giving, small businesses and some of your clients as well on how to survive this period?
Yeah. So I think, Ray, I appreciate the feedback you've just given around the poll that, some of your readers, have given to us. And I think it's a very difficult time. And I think as the banks and I would assume the public sector, we will continuously look at ways of ensuring we are able to support small businesses out there. But it is a massive ask. I think the first thing, Ray, is that there's a lot that has already been put out there. And I think it's important that as a start, as a small business owner, you get to understand what's out there because the schemes are different. So some of them, for instance, the banks are giving, payment relief as it relates to loans. We've got the Oppenheimer scheme that will be announced that will pay small business employees directly. I think the Ruperts have also announced a scheme where they are willing to put capital into the business. So what I'm saying is that there are different instruments that are out there. And as a small business, I think it's important that you just take a step back and just get a sense of what all of those look like, so you can make a decision around which one makes the most sense for you to access, because perhaps not all of them make sense. And many, one tool that works for one specific small business may not necessarily work for the one. So I do acknowledge that at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a single place where there's all of this information available. And maybe that's another thing that you yourselves as the Daily Maverick could look at, is just pulling all of these different components that have been put out there so that it becomes easily accessible, to SMEs. The second piece is that obviously, cash flow is a huge issue. Now, when you become under pressure from a cash flow perspective, there are variable costs that you can deal with, but there are fixed costs that you can't. So it's very important to once again take a step back and understand what can you shut down, what can you not shut down, what is important and what isn't, from your business, and be able to deal with that proactively. What I've also seen happening is that in some instances, businesses are being very innovative and coming up with alternative offerings over this period, without being specific around names. And it is a fairly large business. There's a business that delivers flowers that over this period has decided to start delivering vegetables. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is able to do that, but the point I'm making is that one has to start thinking about, given what I have, given the skill sets that I have, given the operations that I have, are there any other alternatives that I could be looking at to offer out there that starts creating, cash flow, for the business over this period? And I do think that, I know that it's difficult right now, and, businesses are focused on about thinking around the immediate. One of the things that I do think people should be, also exploring is saying to themselves, what happens post this period? Are there opportunities that are going to be presented that perhaps I could explore, that my business could start playing in? It could be that actually the business that you have could fundamentally change in terms of its offer post this period.
Yeah. So, and a lot of, Maverick insiders and people who are on this platform are saying that information flow is one of the bottlenecks, basically. So they don't know where to find the information, because we know that the government has announced about 2 funds, including, I think, the debt relief fund that will support small businesses during the shutdown period. SARS has announced tax relief measures for compliant businesses, I think with an annual turnover of less than 50 million rand. So a lot of people are saying, we don't know where to find the information. And perhaps, John, let's bring you in here. Is this a big issue for your members? And, what are you advising your members on how to survive this period and what to do, perhaps, during this period?
Okay. What we have done as SBI is we've created a page on our website. So it's smallbusiness.co.za. And then you'll find.
Okay, I think we've lost John for a moment. Bongiwe, I was saying to earlier that people don't know where to find the information. They don't know where to go. Are you finding this being problematic as well? It seems like at a very high level, the government has these relief measures, but they're not filtering down to the people who most need it.
Absolutely. I think even I'm struggling to navigate all of the different options that are out there. For instance, the UIF has also made an offer, to small businesses to provide a stipend of sorts, to their employees that they aren't able to pay over this period. So I do think that there's absolutely an opportunity for us to figure out a way of consolidating all of this information into one space, so that small business owners are then able to consume it and understand what makes sense for their business, because they may not necessarily want to tap into all of what's available, but there's a lot that's available. But I'm not sure that the way we've been filtering the information is necessarily helping the small business person out. The way is the go-to place that they should be going to access all of this information and make decisions about what they should, access.
John, are you back with us? Can you hear us?
Okay.
Sorry, John. So before you were cut off, you were saying.
I've turned off the video.
All right, fabulous. Before you were.
Is it better now?
Much better, John. Thank you so much. So you were saying before you were cut off, I asked you about you know, your members, how they're finding this information about these various proposals put up by the government? Is it reaching down to the people who need it the most? I think we're struggling with John Bongiwe, so this might be a twofold question. So we will be asking questions shortly, so just please send us your questions, keep them coming. But, you know, Bongiwe, so, I mean, this is a fairly political question and about, you know, policy making and policymakers when it comes to small businesses. I mean, you know, we know that, you know, the support of, you know, small businesses from a public policy perspective hasn't really been that great. I mean, do you get the sense that if the government was serious about, you know, supporting small businesses in the past, perhaps would have, you know, so that small businesses would have had you know, the firepower to really survive this tough period? Isn't it a little bit too late from a policy and government perspective to be talking about supporting small businesses right now during the crisis?
Right, it can never be too late. I think if anything, I do think this has provided the impetus, perhaps for our government to realize that a lot more needs to be done, because I don't believe that it's that government has not done anything. But obviously the ask is massive for us to really get, you know, the small business sector pumping in this country. So perhaps this becomes the impetus. And if I look at all of the measures that have been put in place so far by government, they're all targeted, you know, at the small business sector, whether it's the UIF, whether it's the, you know, the fund that's been set up by the government, or what has been announced by SARS. So I do think that perhaps this is the impetus that we all needed. And I think, you know, post this, hopefully will be a very different conversation across different stakeholders, because it's not just government, it's the banks, it's the small business associations, you know, it's the chambers of business. There will have to be very different conversations around how do we help and sustain the small business sector in this country, because it is absolutely crucial, you know, for our economy.
So this is the point in which I think we should address some of your questions. They're coming very thick and fast. Bongiwe, there was one question about interest rates that one of our you know, participants asked, which I think is very important. But here's another question. The problems that, okay, will the bank waive initiation fees and reduce interest rates they charge? Maybe can you take a stab at that question, Bongiwe?
So the way we are doing the payment relief is that it's not deemed to be a new contract. So if you do opt in for the payment relief, there will not be any initiation fees. It will simply be an addendum to your contract. And because it's not a new contract that we are creating, we are not reviewing your interest rate. So your interest rate that you currently have on your loan at the moment will remain the same.
Okay, so it'll be a much more fixed option. And most importantly, what if we can't work after April 16 and the lockdown is extended? Most businesses can't survive 21 days, but not 31 days. So this person is asking, Tammy Fraser is asking about, you know, what if the lockdown is extended beyond the 21 days? How do businesses cope and survive then, Bongiwe?
So I think it's going to be very difficult, Ray. I think even from our perspective as the banks, we understand that this potentially could run for a lot longer than just the, you know, the 15 days, or sorry, the 21 days that has been announced by our president. Obviously, the payment relief that we're putting on the table is for 3 months at the moment. Obviously, as an industry, we are, you know, keeping watch on what is transpiring, and we will continuously engage around whether there are any further interventions that we need to lead at an industry level. This is obviously the first take in terms of what we think we can be able to do, but we all understand that this could be a lot longer. And, you know, as things unfold, we will then be able to see whether there are any additional measures that we can put in place.
Yeah, yeah. I must say, from the comments we are getting, Bongiwe, it's also about. I mean, there's a theme going on here, and the theme is again, people don't know where to find, the information. Because one person said, but yes, Bongiwe is correct. We need one central source of all the financial support and information as well. So again, that information is really not coming down, to where it's most needed. Colin says, my bank wants to charge me prime plus 5.7% and an initiation fee of 66,300, which if you don't use are charged on an unused facility fee. I'm not sure what he means by that, Bongiwe. Can you maybe explain that to us?
So obviously, I don't know the details around the specific, the specific individual, but obviously, typically all banks, when you take out a new loan, there's an initiation fee that gets charged. There's an interest rate that gets agreed that's based on a number of parameters that the bank would look at. And yes, some of the banks, if you've got an overdraft facility that you do not use, may charge a non-utilization fee, for that particular overdraft. But I wouldn't know what the specifics are as it relates to the specific case.
Yeah, there's a very important question here, Bongi, about what is meant by small businesses. Does the local, provincial, and national government have a database of them? Are they all active, and are they affected or impacted by the lockdown? Basically, what characterizes a small business? Basically, that's what this person's asking.
That's a very good question, Ray, because I don't think there is necessarily a consistent definition of what constitutes a small business. Even amongst ourselves as the banks, really define small businesses in an inconsistent way. But typically, what the banks have been doing is that when they come out with their payment relief, they are specific around saying if your turnover is X, we deem you to be a small business. As I said, as it relates to the offering from Absa, we have not put in any turnover, hurdles. So any business customer that banks with us has the opportunity to benefit from the payment relief. But I mean, I think the reader is absolutely correct. There isn't necessarily consistency. So each of the, the entities that have been putting out offerings have been defining what they deem to be a small business, largely based on turnover, and unfortunately, it's not consistent.
Yeah. Raven Ganda asks, how do we prove the COVID-19 impact on our finances as SMEs? So when your clients come to you, should they be able to prove that they are actually distressed?
Yeah. I think that's a fair question. And I think particularly from an Absa perspective, we are trying to make sure that this is not onerous, because I think if customers are going to have to spend an extensive amount of time trying to prove that they've been impacted by COVID-19, it would defeat the purpose. So generally, we do look at, what state that customer was in prior to COVID coming in, and that's sort of prior to the 1st of March. And if we can see a clear decline in money coming through the customer's accounts or in their turnover, we also look at the industry that customer is in. We're able, as I said earlier, there are specific industries that we already know upfront are impacted, like your restaurants, tourism, professional services. So there are a number of things that we can look at, but I can reassure, the readers that it's not an onerous exercise. We don't ask for your detail, your income statement. We don't ask, we just need to get a sense of what the impact has been. And generally, we can pick that up from your transactional account, obviously, if you bank with us. And also, we can pick it up based on the industry that customer happens to be in. And in many instances, we just want to get clarity on what is the business and why suddenly a drop in income. And if you explain that to us, typically we deem that to be sufficient.
I just wondered, do you make provisions for entities owned by foreigners? Because we are seeing that in the government's relief measures that they have been excluded from those relief measures. I can think about informal entities such as plaza shops, which are largely foreign-owned and townships. I just wonder, are entities owned by foreigners included in Absa's relief measures?
So where you'd remember that obviously our relief measures are targeted at customers that have loans with us. So obviously all customers that have loans with us are properly registered businesses, and some of them may have, foreigners as shareholders. But if you are a business that is banks with us or has funding with us, you are eligible to participate. Your shareholding is irrelevant.
Also, there's a question here from Dante Mashile. Why aren't banks, I'm not sure if this is true, but, Bongiwe, you can have a stab at it. Dante Mashile, and I'm losing the comment. Dante Mashile says, why are banks not applying their enterprise and supply development finance at this time? I mean, this is important because, including SMEs into banks, various supply chains will actually give them the boost that they need. Are you thinking about that? About banks applying their enterprise and supply development initiatives at this time?
So, I mean, those initiatives continue to be there, Ray. I think obviously for customers to benefit from our enterprise supplier development initiatives, it's quite a stringent process. And really what we wanted to do is to make sure that we reach as many customers as possible through this process, and that we make it as simple as possible. So the Enterprise Supplier Development Program has a specific mandate, obviously, to it that talks to specific types of customers, specific ownership, that those businesses need to have. And there's a very stringent process, and it's almost creating a new contract, because you have to assess affordability and a whole host of things in order for those businesses to be able to benefit from loans to our Enterprise Supplier Development Program. In this particular instance, the interventions that we've put in are around customers who already have some form of lending, with us. The Enterprise Supplier Development Program continues to be there and will play an important role with a specific mandate, in our country.
Rosetta Klava asks, credit insurance, how can it be utilized in this COVID period? There is insurance tied to some of the loans that banks give out. So how can it be utilized if it can at all, Bongiwe?
So there is. It's typically, though, with individual customers as opposed to SME customers that, individuals would take out credit insurance. Obviously, I think one needs to approach, their bank or whoever the lender is in that particular space to understand, what the credit insurance covers. In some instances, it does cover retrenchment if you're an individual. But I would say to individuals that they must approach their banks to understand what it is, if it's available at all. As I said, in many instances, the SME loans people don't really take out credit life insurance.
So, Bongiwe, it seems like a lot of people disagree with your assessment about whether the government has supported small businesses or has created an enabling environment, in fact, for small businesses. Diane Jacobson says the main takeaway here is that you are on your own as a small business, I think, owner, and beholden to banks who will dictate the terms of loans. I'm not sure if you want to engage. Don, do you want to have a stab at it or respond to it, Bongiwe?
Look, I can understand, how small business owners feel out there. It's a very tough space, and sometimes it feels quite lonely. I absolutely appreciate that. Do I think enough has been done? I think there's always an opportunity to do more. And I think we will continue to the Banking Association to work with government to see what further opportunities there are. I do think that already a lot has been put on the table. And that's why I emphasized earlier on that I think it's important that, small business owners ensure that they have a clear understanding of what's already been put out there, because there is a lot that's already been put on the table.
Yeah. There's a interesting question about writing off loans. We've seen this in the US, where the government is sort of toying or proposing ideas about loans that are outstanding, that are held by small businesses, might be written off. Further grants or loans that will assist small businesses during this process will be written off, provided if SMEs make a commitment and undertaking to not lay off workers, even beyond the COVID-19 period and the various shutdowns that economies are putting in place. Is that feasible for our banking sector? I know our banking sector is very well regulated. It has a lot of, adequate capital buffers as well. Do you think that's feasible for South Africa to consider writing off loans if SMEs are, distressed to such an extreme?
So I think to your point, Ray, banks are very well regulated, not only within this country, but internationally. And so it's very important that whatever it is we do as banks, and in fact, one of the things that we've been very clear about is that we wanted very clear directives, from our regulator around how we need to deal with things like impairments, over this particular time, or where loans, or when people miss payments over this time. So I do think that if something like that were to be done, it needs to be understood at an industry level. Because I do think that post all of this, we want to ensure that we still have a sustainable banking sector. And that's why I mentioned that there will continue to be conversations between the banking sector and the governments, because I think what we should not underestimate is the role that governments have played in some of these first world countries as it relates to some of the, the relief that the banks have put, into those economies. So if there were to ever be, anything along those lines, it would have to be looked at an industry level. One would need to understand the implication of that, on the banks, on the profitability of the banks, on, the capital requirements of the banks, but it would have to be looked at holistically.
I see we're getting a lot of questions also about what constitutes a small business. Daily Maverick puts a comment that I think is very important. She says, coming back to the classification of what makes a small business, it seems that the definition is based on turnover. That seems so arbitrary. One business can employ 5 people and turn over 15 million rand on profit margin of about 35%. Another business could employ 150 people and have turnover of 150 million, but the profit margin is 2%. Surely that business is the one that should be protected. These larger businesses are falling through the cracks. I guess that's quite an important comment, eh?
It is an important point. And as I said, there is no overarching definition of what, so the government has tried to, and I think largely in many instances, they've either used, turnover or used how much lending a business has from a bank to try and determine what constitutes a small business. I think that is why we've taken a view to make it available to any business that banks with us, because it does become very difficult to determine what constitutes a small business and what doesn't. And I think to the point that's been made, you could have a 50 million rand turnover business that only has 3 employees, or a 20 million rand turnover business that has 15 employees. Which one is smaller? Which one can be deemed to be a small business? So it is a very, very difficult, construct to get consistency around, because in some instances, people look at what's your asset value? They look at your turnover, they look at number of employees. So there are many different ways of looking at this. And unfortunately, there is no consistent view across the world, actually, of what constitutes a small business.
Another question saying, why are relief measures a once-off event? Can't banks make this a regular measure? Even if there's no economic shutdown, could this be a regular option offered to SMEs?
Well, we have to make sure that banks are sustainable. Ray. And I think ultimately there also has to be an appreciation that the banks have several stakeholders that they have to look at. We have our customers, we've got our shareholders, we've got our own employees, as the banks. I think, given where the country finds itself, we've put our hands up, to play a role as good corporate citizens. And as I indicated, we will continue to review where we are. If this continues for longer than the periods that we initially think it might go on for, we may go back and have to reassess what we've already put on the table and whether there's an opportunity to do more.
Donta Mashila also commenting about the operating environment of small businesses. The COVID-19 crisis has exposed the challenges in a stark nature that we do not have a conducive small business environment. I still see the interventions being priced not at a developmental nature. Credit measures needed to be relaxed for small businesses. But I mean, the point here, Bongiwe, is that, if we do emerge from this difficult period, surely it cannot be business as usual. The way in which the government approaches policy making and supporting small businesses, surely we cannot do, things the same way. I mean, what's the definition of stupidity, doing the same thing twice, hey?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think I alluded to this earlier on, Ray, is that I think, in fact, across the whole nation, whether it's in your personal capacity or in a work environment or in small businesses, it cannot be business as usual. And so, as I said earlier, my belief or my hope is that this provides the right impetus for us to have very different conversations around how we ensure that small businesses are properly supported, not just only from a banking perspective, but also from a government perspective, as well as those institutions that are out there that are meant to support, small businesses. So I do think that emerging from this, there's going to have to be a conversation that really starts thinking around what else, how do we fundamentally change the construct of how we support our small businesses, so that if we are faced with another crisis along these lines, hopefully a lot more businesses would be able to survive.
Someone says, what about some of us who have done everything we could to avoid going into debt? What support are we going to get? So I guess, a lot of small businesses would rather prefer relying on their existing cash flow than add on, further debt or debt that might threaten the health of their cash flows. Is debt a good idea, Bongiwe?
Well, debt is not completely a bad idea, and I think it really depends on what you use, that debt for, in your business. And for those businesses that aren't indebted, obviously there are other measures that are out there that have been put out by the government. I spoke about the initiative that's being driven by the Oppenheimers, that's supported by all the banks, where businesses would be able to access funding in order for them to pay their employees. So that's another option that's been put on the table. I understand that there's also an initiative that's being driven by the Rupert family, where small businesses would be able to also access direct funding into their businesses. So obviously the piece that the banks have largely driven has largely spoken to the loan side of things, because in many instances, that's one of the biggest cost lines that, that businesses have. And it's the easiest way of putting cash flow back into the hands of our customers, from a banking perspective. But as I had already mentioned, there are other options out there that go beyond, payment relief around loans.
And Tricia Livingston says, how can I apply for a loan when I have no guarantee that I'll be able to repay it? I'm not sure, Bongiwe, if you want to tackle that.
I think in the first instance, a bank is not going to give you a loan unless they have some sense around ability to repay. Obviously, small businesses fall within the NCA, when we assess those loans. So we'll assess those loans and see whether there is, ability to repay. I think it's important, obviously, to also understand that banks from loans are not the only source of funding. There are other sources of funding, that are available out there that are not necessarily, loans from banks. And depending on where a small business finds itself, they may look at alternatives from a funding perspective.
So we lost John earlier on, but he did send us a couple of notes that I would really like to convey. And the question that I wanted to ask him about how do we move on forward? How do we move on forward after this crisis period? And he says, pay now for work completed and pay in advance for work that requires suppliers. So I guess small businesses must be paid on time. We know there's a big issue there, Bongiwe, with small businesses not being paid on time as well. And he says that we need to simplify access to government financial support. Again, it talks, about the issue of the accessibility on the information. Government should consider a VAT payment holiday, or at least scrap the penalty for 3 months to a year if SMEs cannot make the payment. So we're talking about further tax, reliefs there. And he goes on to say, again, we want both the public and private sector to make early payments for invoices. That's 7 days after submissions of invoices to be made into law, or at least part of the governance and sustainability framework for small businesses, government and SOCs as well. So again, early payments are very important. And he talks about, and this is a very important comment he makes. He says the biggest letdown has been about the failure to implement Section 18 of the Small Businesses Act. This would have required all ministers, legislators, and policymakers to think small business first before enacting new rules, which can end up becoming more strangling red tape. But again, he speaks about red tape, Bongiwe, and that's something that also comes through to the comments about bureaucracy and red tape for a lot of small businesses. I guess going forward, how do we keep this momentum going forward and not allow red tape to choke SMEs?
So I think that's an important point, Ray, because I think it is one of the big issues in South Africa. The amount of time that it takes one to set up a small business in this country relative to the rest of the world is still, fairly unacceptable. And I think there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that we make the environment conducive for people to want to set up small businesses, for people to want to become entrepreneurs, and as I said earlier on, create opportunities for employment. It is my hope that, on the back of this, perhaps, ourselves as the banking industry, government, and all relevant stakeholders will find a way to start working far closely together, to find ways of ensuring that small businesses are better supported. I do think that there is a lot that's already being done, across many different parts of this country. But obviously, it's not enough because the need is far bigger than what we've been able to do thus far.
Yeah, his parting shot is, I asked him about, the long-term impact of the coronavirus on SMEs and how to survive that. And I think he says, I think it'll be wise to think about a 6 to 12 month lockdown period. So that's quite scary. And ask for help from your big business clients if they have any incentives to do so. If you can, go into trading the much needed supplies such as medical and food supplies. For the government, please ensure the economic support measures are in place for the duration of the crisis. Again, speaking to those measures being in place for the next 6 to 12 months. Bongiwe, your parting shots, we have about 2 minutes left for the webinar. Any last words, any key takeaways we need to take from this session?
Yeah. So I think, as I said earlier on, for me, it's important that small business owners familiarize themselves with what has already been made available as a first step. And I think we will think about how we ensure that we make that information, available. The second piece is that I think we all appreciate that this is a very, very difficult time. Not only, for individuals, but particularly for small businesses. And I think the challenge with that small business sector is that you also directly impact their employees in a country where our levels of unemployment are at the levels where they are right now. I do think that there's a lot that's being done by the different, parts, whether it's the banks or or the government to, to ensure that we're able to put money back into the pockets of small businesses. I do want to say that we will see how things unfold. We've obviously put out the measures that we've put out there as the banks. We will continue to monitor how things go, and where there's an opportunity for us to do further, stuff to ensure that we're able to support small business, we will look at that.
Bongiwe, this has been very productive. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been very helpful. Apologies for losing John midway through the webinar, but thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar. Thank you so much, Absa, for sponsoring this webinar. And remember, if you haven't joined our Maverick Insider community, I would implore you to do so by visiting Daily Maverick's website or contact us on insiders@dailymaverick.co.za. Bongiwe and our participants, keep safe, stay safe. Right?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye.